Hi, Liam. Good to meet you too.
And you see David is already on also. So I don't know if anybody explained to you, but I'm a psychologist and of course a music lover also. But one of the things that always intrigues me is finding out a bit about the background of musicians in order to help other people understand how you got to be the world-class musicians you are today. So I'd like to begin with questions that deal with one, where were you born? Was your family musically inclined? And the third question, when did you know music was going to be it for you as a profession?
You want to go first, Desiree?
Okay, sure. I was born in Milwaukee, but my parents had just recently immigrated to the United States. My mother from Switzerland, my father from Germany. They met in English class. And my mother loved classical music and especially the violin. She played a little bit, but nothing formal, but she loved the instrument and would sneak me into concerts at a very young age. I loved the violin or was very excited when I heard a violinist. And so that's how I got.
Do you remember a time when you said to yourself, I love this so much, I want it to be my career?
I think especially as a child, when you go to concerts and the magic of seeing a concert hall and big orchestra and seeing a soloist on stage. I would say the first time I was very lucky at a very young age to be able to solo with an orchestra and to have that feeling of being surrounded by all these musicians in this grand concert space and also just playing amazing music.
Where was that, by the way?
That was actually an orchestra hall with the DePaul Symphony.
David, what about you?
I was born in Plymouth, in Devon, the southwest part of England. I wasn't a child prodigy, Desiree was, but my parents loved music. My mother played piano pretty well. I went to a boarding school. They have these specialist music schools in England, which was incredibly beneficial because it gave me time to sort of study the cello as well as doing the academic stuff. And then I studied in Manchester, in England, and then at the Yehudi Menuhin School in Switzerland.
How did you get together to form the Black Oak Ensemble?
Well, Desiree and I were already in a group, Lincoln Trio, which is a piano trio, and we were sort of looking at venues that didn't have a piano. Very often we wouldn't get a gig because they didn't have a piano. And we just loved playing string quartets. We often played music at home and with string ensembles. And we loved that sort of format. And we thought, well, let's have a look at it. And Aurelian was a friend of ours. And at the time he was playing first violin in the spectral string quartet, which is very fine contemporary quartet. And we persuaded him to pick up the viola and just give it a go. And his story is that he had to write a fingering and the letter name and the string over every note of our first concert that he played. And he did it incredibly well and then fell in love with the viola. And that's sort of how it happened.
Someone asked David and I to do, but it had to be with string players. And they said ideally a string trio. And for some reason, there were no violists in town available at that time. And so, because of that, that one concert, Aurelian learned to play viola. And so he played that concert. And then we dabbled in like just sight reading string trios and then just did it for fun and added a guitarist for a while. And we're doing some fun arrangements that we did all together. And we found more and more string trio music and started to take it a lot more seriously. David and I were in Hungary in Budapest, and we ran across some music of composers that we had never heard of and brought it back, and we read these string trios. And when we did a Google about the composers, we found out they all had perished in concentration camps. So we thought there may be more string trios out there. So we got in contact with Bob Elias of the Oral Foundation, James Conlin's foundation in Los Angeles, and in Forbidden Music Regained in Amsterdam, and discovered there were quite a lot of composers that wrote amazing string trios, which then unfolded to our first album, Silenced Voices. It was not a plan, it just sort of organically happened. And from there, we kept on discovering more and more wonderful music. And it's just been an amazing journey that continues.
Did you ever run across a string trio by someone that surprised you? In other words, you didn't think they ever produced something like that.
I was just surprised at the number of composers in the 20th century that wrote string trios, like Schoenberg. And the Schoenberg string trio is an incredible. Penderecki, almost Lutosławski, almost every 20th century composer you can think of wrote a string trio for some reason. Mozart, of course, the inventor of so many things, but he almost invented the string trio as we know it now with his divertimento. And then Beethoven did these string trios. And then there's a lull. There's nothing really after that for many years. But then at the beginning of the 20th century, there's this reemergence of this medium. So it's kind of interesting. Also, we were amazed that there are all these British women composers specifically that had written string trios. It was just kind of an interesting discovery.
Do you ever feel that you should be adding a fourth person, make it a quartet?
No, but that's a very good question. We have to compensate sometimes for a fourth person. The string trio rep is so different from string quartets. I mean, composers do approach it in different ways, but almost inevitably you find that they are wanting a huge sound from three people rather than four. You have a lot of double stops, I would say, more than quartets. They are looking for a fuller sound. But that's a good question.
I think that's the whole magic of the string trio. And we've heard it numerous times how there's three people that walk out on stage, and there's so many quartet lovers out there. People that go to classical music concerts, that go to chamber music concerts, are really huge quartet fans. And I've heard so many people that were skeptical when they said, we saw three people walking out on stage and we didn't know how that was going to compare because we love string quartets. And they're inevitably really surprised, not only by the music and composers. I think that's the exciting thing about some of these string trios. They come from composers that a lot of people haven't heard. There was a wonderful wealth of French music from the 1930s, very beautiful, very Debussy-like, incredible music that we've had some presenters that are very knowledgeable about music that say they could not believe that they hadn't heard of these composers, that the music was so wonderful, and that three people could make a sound, it's a very different sound than a string quartet. And the writing is very different because it's very soloistic for each instrument. When you ask to add a fourth person, it just changes the dynamic of the sound of the group and of the group itself. They're just such different animals, a string quartet and a string trio. They're so different to play.
Who were some of the French composers that you uncovered had written string trios?
The famous one is the Jean Francais string trio, which a lot of people play in their repertoire. One that we didn't know, but some people play, I guess occasionally, is the Jean Cras, C-R-A-S trio, which I think is an absolutely fantastic piece of music, up there with Debussy and Ravel. And unfortunately, he was not a prolific composer because he was an admiral in the French Navy. So he didn't really have a lot of downtime to write music. But the music that he has written is absolutely wonderful, and a very, very skillful writer, particularly for string instruments, I think.
And also, there were a number of trios we uncovered. So I'll start with a Corsican, Tomasi, who is known for all of his brass works. Very famous brass writer, wrote a string trio, and we were the first to actually perform it. And that was exciting. Kazutsu, also, Samazoi, Pierne. There was a trio called the Pasquier Trio. They were brothers and quite amazing. If you listen on YouTube, they were fabulous players. And these composers wrote for this trio and were never professionally recorded. So it was exciting to dive into that. We found 7 trios from that time period in the 1930s of incredible music. And that was just an absolute joy to play and an absolute joy to discover.
Who's the leader in your group?
I have to say, Desiree is the leader. That's also a very good question. In a string quartet, the first violinist is usually the person that takes charge. String trio, yeah, maybe the responsibilities are more equally divided, I would say.
When you ask leader, I think that's a very broad question. I think if a musical leader or a leader of the group, I think I'm more of a leader of the group. I think musically, I think if you interviewed us all separately, we would say we all have a pretty equal voice, which doesn't happen often, but when we argue, our arguments are usually resolved pretty easily by let's record this, let's listen back, and you hear different things. That's our first method. If we're sitting there arguing over something, I'm like, okay, guys, let's just record this. We record it, we listen back. I don't think there's ever been a time where we've listened back where we haven't all been on the same page of agreeing it worked or it didn't work. So musically, I feel we all are a pretty equal voice. As far as the nitty gritty, I do all the travel. I book this, I book that, that sort of thing. So I guess I'm the leader from that aspect.
How long have you been together as a trio?
10 years.
Where did the name come from?
What we were trying to do originally was have a core ensemble of a string trio and bring other people into that, whether it would be a pianist to make a piano quartet or a guitarist or an accordion player. We wanted this sort of core ensemble and then have branches out to other instruments to bring in. So we didn't want to define ourselves as a string trio at the beginning. So we worked a lot with the guitarist, this wonderful guitarist called Goran Ivanovic. That's what we thought our original direction would be. But we didn't understand how much string trio repertoire there was. But getting back to the name, Black Oak, we were trying to find a Chicago sort of connection. And then we discovered that there was a tree in our backyard that was an oak tree, and we didn't realize what kind of oak tree it was. Black oak apparently is a sort of native species to the Chicago area. And that's just sort of how it came about, really.
We are the Black Oak Ensemble, that if we want to play a concert with a guitar, they can be a part of the ensemble. We can give a concert as the Black Oak Ensemble with guest guitarist or bandoneon player or extra violinist or harpsichord. We're going to have a collaboration with Jory Vinicor. So it just keeps it open for collaboration, which is also important to us.
We feel also strongly that the group keep going, even if after we stop playing. We want this thing to grow like a tree, and for other people to fill in, and for other people to come into our places. So we're a non-for-profit, and we just want people to keep running with this.
Do you all live in Chicago?
Yes.
Desiree and I do. Aurelian used to live in Chicago. He now lives in New Jersey, but he's literally here every week.
In our house. And he has his own bedroom.
So you have a new recording. Has it been released, or is it about to be released?
It's been released.
What does Dance of the Night Sky mean?
So Dance of the Night Sky is the title of the composition by Shirley Thompson. And this was a commission. We had two new commissions, one from Shirley Thompson and one from Erilyn Wallen. And these are two very, very notable English composers. And so we went back and forth with the title for this album, but everyone agreed, including Jim Ginsberg of Sadie Records. And so that's kind of how it came about.
How did you decide on which pieces, the repertoire for this recording?
How this all started was sort of a funny story. They were driving me to Northwestern, and at the time, Switzerland and the UK and France were all in World Cup. So we were all Googling scores. And then we were trying to also at the same time come up with, just a new project. And think I'd left half the Google in, and I then put in David, or I think Aurelian jokingly said, "Oh, we just did a French CD. How about a British CD?" And we all laughed. But I still put it in Google, and up came a piece that Shirley Thompson wrote for the women's football soccer team. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I did a British composers that wrote string trios. And all of a sudden, a number of women came up having written string trios. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. I think 2 or 3 I found. And then I did further Google, and quite a few came up. And then we just started listening to them and deciding which ones we liked. And we actually had to cull quite a few that we really wanted to do. Like Imogen Holst wrote a string trio, and it was just interesting. You just never think that that's where you're going to find a wealth of string trios. And especially since they're all living composers, it was just really wonderful to know that we could have a dialogue and champion living female composers. That was just an exciting thing to find.
You commissioned, was it 2 pieces for this?
We commissioned the Shirley Thompson and the Erilyn Wallen.
Were the composers involved in your recording?
One of them was significantly Shirley Thompson. We'd met her in London a couple of times to sort of get to know her. We really connected with her music and with her as a person as well. She came and stayed with us, and yeah, we worked very, very closely on that piece.
And on Erilyn's, we did it via recordings back and forth with her, and she was very particular about what she wanted, which was really wonderful. It was particularly funny because we were in the south of France, and that day we took a picture of the trio in front of a hay bale. And then about 2 hours later, we get a piece titled "Making Hay" by Erilyn Wallen, which means something a little bit different in the UK, as David will explain. But it was just kind of funny to have that coincidence. And so we were always in contact with her, and she was very specific about what she wanted for the recording, but she was not there for the recording, and Shirley was, though.
Did any of the composers make changes as a result of hearing you play the music?
I think all composers do that, and they're minor things. Very often they're not notes. There are dynamic changes, there are balance changes between the instruments. But inevitably that happens. And that's why it's so great to work with living composers. I wish we had that channel with Beethoven and
Right. Well, I always tell people one of the reasons I do my channel is 100 years from now, we haven't the benefit of being able to talk to Beethoven, for example, but 100 years from now, they will actually hear the Black Oak Ensemble personnel talk, and maybe that'll help.
Yeah, it's very true.
Over what period of time did you record the album?
It took 4 or 5 days. And we did, 1 week we did like 3 or 4 of the pieces, and then the other 4 the next. I mean, it was done within close proximity, this particular album.
And were you all involved in the post-production?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sadie Records is wonderful. They allow you to come up with your own ideas and pitch it to them. We are back there with Jim, listening back after every take. We're very, very fully involved in the whole process, and even in the album cover and all that kind of stuff. It's like it's a wonderful. We're so lucky in Chicago. We are so lucky to have Sadie Records.
I've been fortunate enough to interview Jim, so I know what you.
Oh,
yes. Question for each of you: do you listen to music yourselves?
I listen to all kinds of music.
And what about you, David?
Same thing. I go on fixations with certain composers or certain genres of music, and I sort of go for a few weeks into one kind of spell of music.
If there was one composer you could go back in history and have lunch with, who would it be?
Beethoven.
Oh my goodness. That is just so hard. if I was on a desert island, I guess I would want my Bach. So it would have to be Bach.
There was a BBC survey of classical musicians about what their favorite composer was, and everyone is expecting them to say, oh, Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, and Brahms turned out to be the favorite composer of classical musicians.
We were able to play live on the radio with our students, the Brahms Sextet. This was on Monday night, and it's just such joy, that piece. Before you even play a phrase, you're smiling. So
right. All right. I really appreciated talking to you.
So much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Good meeting you.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice meeting you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.